Today is the feast of Saint Don Bosco, who is a patron saint of the Home of the Mother and a patron saint of the Universal Church, and a saint who's also very much linked to the whole apostolate that we're doing here in Ireland. Today, the reading that all the priests are reading on the feast of Saint Don Bosco, there's a reading from one of the writings of Saint Don Bosco, and it says how all those who work with the youth have to be fathers to the young people. It's something which we've probably heard it many times, but it's something which is so true. There are many aspects of what it means to be a father, but one of the major aspects is to work for the children, to spend oneself for them. There's a moment in the life of Don Bosco when he finally recovers from his sickness, and he walks to the balcony and he sees underneath how it's filled with young people cheering for him, happy that he's still alive. And as he looks out to them, he says, "Up till now, I've lived for you and for other things. But from now on, I'm going to dedicate and live everything for you." It was something which he said wholeheartedly, and it's something which which is so beautiful, because the young people they had suffered for him to recover. Like, God could have taken him. I'm convinced that Don Bosco was ready to go to heaven at that time already. But after his sickness, there were some who actually said that they were going to, I think it was bread and water for the rest of their lives, they had promised. So they were obviously praying excessively for him to survive. And he says, "From now on, I'm going to live for you." And it's beautiful because that's the attitude of a father. There's a story that Chris Stefanik tells, and I also hold it close in my heart. There's a moment when his son gets lost. They're out on a camping trip as a family, and they can't find his son. They had been all close to the river, and he was convinced, since he saw his son last time by the lake, that his son had actually drowned in the lake. And so after a couple of minutes, he just runs into the water, not finding him anywhere else. And he's looking through the water, screaming out the name of his son. And at that moment, he says, he looks up to God and says, "Look, take everything you've given me, these 14 years of a happy marriage, the money I have, my house, take everything else. Give me my son. Give me back my son." His son had just wandered off with another family, and he was just crying, thinking that he didn't know where his parents were. He was fine. But this example, this visceral example of the love of a father and how a father is willing to do everything for a son, that's what we want to do. As I'm saying these words of the homily, I have Brother Stephen in front of me, and he had a moment recently, and I've already commented this. He had a moment recently when he was balancing a desk on his chin, and he found himself surrounded by a mob of happy young people. And they were cheering. Today, I was actually walking around that same school, and I don't know if it was 25 people, maybe more, who's called me Father Stephen, or Brother Stephen, or Father Stephen, Brother Stephen. "Are you Brother Stephen? Are you Father Stephen?" I had a lot of that today, and I think it was beautiful, because it shows that Brother Stephen has to become Father Stephen. It shows how when experiencing the love of the young people and how it's Our Lady, she's behind everything, like the whole life of Don Bosco. She's the one who's putting him and showing what she wants to do with him, and showing him that these are the young people he has to spill his blood for. These are the ones who you have to say to them, "I want to live the rest of my life, I'm going to live it for you." The motto of Don Bosco, which is a motto which is very biblical, St. Francis de Sales had the same motto, probably tons of saints have had it. It's from the 12th chapter of Genesis, where Melchizedek says, Give me souls, take from me everything else. Give me souls, take from me everything else. This is the motto of Don Bosco, and this is his motto as a father. This is par excellence, like the words of a father. There's a moment in the scriptures which is actually a lot like Christophanic, a modern day. Christophanic is a modern day youth person who gives speeches, and it's also something which is really similar in the 18th chapter of second book of Samuel. There's a moment when David loses his son Absalom, who they kill him because Absalom had rebelled against him. Even, in other words, it was an example of a bad son, of a son who was going against his own father's life, trying to steal everything that he had, his glory, his everything, his kingdom. And the words of David with the death of his son isn't, finally I got my enemy, I got him. It's not that. He goes up the tower and he bewails, Absalom, Absalom, my son Absalom, oh that I would have died instead of you. And the victory that day became a funeral, became a moment of sadness. But notice how he says, oh, that I would have died instead of you. In other words, the desire of a father is to give his life, to spill himself for the children. There's a moment another moment in the life of Don Bosco where it was actually today we're on the 31st of January, on the 29th of January, 1880, there's a moment when he was at a theater production and the main speaker, the main actor, didn't have his voice, like his ventriloquial cords or whatever it is, weren't working. And Don Bosco says, I'm going to pray for you that the Lord grant me and give me whatever your sickness is so you can perform this play and speak so that it works. And the Lord permits him to suffer whatever that other guy was suffering, and him, the other guy, the actor, to do his complete thing, to finish his play for everybody, for the joy of everybody. And during that time, Don Bosco couldn't speak. Like, they tried talking to him, it just wasn't working. And the actor was fine until afterwards, then it switched back. And there's another moment in the life of Don Bosco, and this has to do with the whole thing of being a father. There's another moment in the life of Don Bosco where there was a moment when Don Bosco, was his turn to speak, and he said, look, I can't speak right now because I have a pain, and he didn't even say huge, he just said, I have a pain in my teeth, in my back teeth or whatever. And one of the people there says, well, why don't you pray to the Lord, just like you pass your voice, why don't you pray to the Lord that you pass me, some priest who was there, probably some Salesian, I imagine, why don't you pray to the Lord to pass me the pain that you feel so you can have your mind occupied on giving the talk to us. And she's like, okay, I'll do that. And at that moment, the young man cowered, and he actually went into a ball and just started to scream in pain. So he was just screaming in pain, so they had to carry him out in pain. And Don Bosco was fine, so he gave the talk, and the other person was screaming outside. And then afterwards, Don Bosco finished the talk, and the pain came back to him, and he wasn't able to think anymore. And there you go. The reason I say these last two examples is because today in the gospel, there's a moment when, in the gospel, there's a moment when there's a lady who is suffering hemorrhages for 12 years. She's bleeding on a regular basis, and they touch Jesus, and it says that dynamis went out of him, power went out of him, strength went out of him, and he was exhausted. In other words, he became tired so that she could be cured. He allows himself to be drained. It says also in the gospel acclamation that we said just before the gospel, it says from Isaiah, Christ took away our infirmities and bore our diseases. And as it says, his wounds have healed us, as it says from Isaiah. In other words, our ideal is precisely that. to suffer. Like I'm looking at Brother Steve in the back. Look, that's our ideal. Ideal is to truly be fathers to the young people. There's a phrase from Sirach, and I think it's so good for us to read. But this is true for everyone, even for married couples, to really look. My whole desire for my children is that they thrive, that I can to spend myself for my children, to get not just simply to work, but when I come home and like the dishes have to get done, or then someone needs help with homework, to give everything I have, to lose my strength, my time, everything I have for them, to spend myself for them. This is the phrase. This is from Sirach chapter 4, verse 10. Be like a father to orphans instead of a husband to their mother. In other words, play games with them. Don't be with the mother. Spend time with the kids. It's more work, it's more everything, but it's more like Christ. Be like a father to orphans instead of a husband to their mother. You will then be like a son of the Most High, and he will love you more than your mother does. In other words, like Christ will love you even more than Our Lady does. This is something, all these things are things that John Bosco lived. The point of this homily is that our ideal be like his, that our ideal be to spend ourselves, to take on, to spend ourselves for the young people, to beg. That's what we're going to do in this Mass. We're going to beg Our Lady, beg our Lord to have the grace to have that same resolution that Don Bosco had when he recovered his strength. From now on, I will live completely for you. Saint Don Bosco, pray for us.